The Veridian Conclave had achieved what they considered perfection, a society free from the disruptive turbulence of emotion. Generations of meticulous genetic engineering and psychosocial conditioning had rendered their species, the Veridians, beings of pure, untainted logic. Their minds were calm, orderly universes, their decisions made with flawless rationality. They viewed the wider galaxy, teeming with emotionally volatile species, with a mixture of detached pity and profound concern. Emotions, in the Veridian worldview, were evolutionary vestiges, primitive impulses that led to chaos, conflict, and inefficiency. Humanity was a prime example of this emotional flaw. The Veridians had observed Earth and its burgeoning interstellar colonies for several decades. They saw a species capable of brilliant technological leaps and profound artistic expression, yet constantly mired in internal strife, irrational passions, and bewildering sentimentality. Human art, music, their very stories, so often centered on love, grief, joy, rage, were, to the Veridian analyst Thuron, data streams corrupted by illogical sentiment. It was a tragedy, he had reported to the Conclave, a species with such potential, shackled by its own primitive neurochemistry. Thus, the Human Upliftment Initiative was conceived. It was not a conquest, nor an infiltration, but a benevolent gesture, as the Veridians saw it. They would offer humanity the gift of emotional tranquility, a gentle nudge towards a more logical, efficient existence. The first step was a small, carefully controlled experiment. A joint research station, the Vanguard Beacon, was established in a neutral sector, staffed by both Veridian and human scientists. It was here the Veridians planned to introduce their emotional attenuation device, or EAD. The EAD was a marvel of Veridian biotechnology. It didn't eradicate emotions entirely, merely dampened them. It smoothed the peaks and valleys of emotional response, creating a state of calm, focused neutrality. Thuron, chief psychosociologist for the initiative, oversaw the selection of 20 human volunteers from the Vanguard Beacon's crew. They were told the device would help reduce stress and improve focus in the demanding environment of deep space research. The humans, ever curious and often stressed, readily agreed. Dr. Aris Thorne, a lead human researcher on the Beacon, watched with a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism as the first human volunteers underwent the painless EAD attunement. Thuron, his Veridian counterpart, observed with his usual serene detachment. Thuron's face, like all Veridian faces, was placid, his voice a calm monotone. His large, dark eyes, however, missed nothing. Initially, the results seemed promising, at least from the Veridian perspective. The 20 attuned humans reported feeling calmer, less prone to irritation or anxiety. Their work output in routine tasks showed a marginal increase in consistency. There were fewer interpersonal squabbles in the attuned group's living quarters. Thuron noted this in his logs. Phase 1 demonstrating expected reduction in emotional volatility. Subjects exhibit enhanced placidity. Dr. Thorne, however, felt a subtle disquiet. The attuned humans, they were calmer, yes, but also flatter. Their usual banter was muted. The inventive, sometimes chaotic energy that characterized human problem-solving sessions seemed diminished in their group. A research assistant, Lena, known for her infectious laugh and bursts of creative insight, now went about her duties with quiet, monotonous precision. Her laughter was gone. Her insights, while still logical, lacked their usual spark of intuition. The first real test came not from a planned scenario, but from the cold indifference of space. An unexpected solar particle event, far larger than any forecasted, slammed into the Vanguard Beacon. Alarms blared, a jarring, chaotic sound that was anathema to Veridian sensibilities, but a familiar spur to action for humans. On the station's command deck, chaos erupted, or rather, it erupted among the non-attuned humans. Captain Eva Rostova, no relation to the Odyssey's captain, though the name was common, barked orders, her voice sharp with urgency, but laced with a confidence that steadied her crew. Engineers shouted status reports, their voices tinged with fear, but also adrenaline-fueled focus. Navigators worked frantically to orient the station's emergency shields. There were arguments, Quick, heated exchanges about the best course of action, followed by even quicker resolutions as options were weighed and decisions made with gut instinct as much as calculation. Thuron observed this human emotionality with detached distaste, even as he calmly analyzed sensor readings. Such inefficiency, such noise. Then he turned his attention to the attuned human contingent, who were also on duty in various sections. His expectation was that their calm, logical state would make them paragons of efficiency in this crisis. The reality was horrifyingly different. The attuned humans were calm, yes, too calm. Faced with cascading system failures and urgent, contradictory alarms, they seemed paralyzed. Their training protocols were clear, but the situation was outside the neat parameters of their simulations. They lacked the ability to make rapid, intuitive leaps to prioritize in the face of overwhelming, incomplete data. In the main engineering bay, a critical coolant leak threatened to overload the station's primary reactor. Chief Engineer Marcus Bell, a non-attuned human with decades of experience, was a whirlwind of motion and shouted commands, his face grim, sweat beading on his brow. He improvised, bypassed fried circuits, and jury-rigged a temporary fix, his every action driven by a desperate urgency. Two attuned engineers, assigned to assist him, stood by their consoles, their expressions placid. When Bell yelled for them to manually reroute power through a secondary conduit, a risky, non-standard procedure, they paused. "Chief Bell," one said, his voice perfectly even, "Protocol 7.3 dictates that secondary power routing requires a full diagnostic cycle to prevent system overload. That cycle takes approximately 8 minutes." "We don't have 8 minutes, damn it," Bell roared, his face flushed with emotion, fear, anger, determination. "The core temperature is rising. Do it now." The attuned engineer tilted his head slightly. "But the risk of a cascade failure if we bypass diagnostics is 37.4%. A logical approach suggests." Bell, in a fit of purely human frustration and necessity, shoved him aside and initiated the bypass himself, his hands flying across the controls with a desperate, intuitive speed. The station shuddered, lights flickered, but the core temperature began to slowly, miraculously decrease. A similar scene played out in medical. Dr. Anya Sharma, the station's chief medical officer, also non-attuned, dealt with a flood of minor injuries, burns from shorted panels, bruises from being thrown by the lurching station. Her attuned nurse, however, seemed to struggle with triage, methodically assessing each minor injury with the same calm detachment, while a more seriously injured crewman further down the line needed urgent attention. Dr. Sharma, her voice tight with controlled panic, had to physically guide the nurse. The most devastating moment for Thuron's understanding, however, came from a structural failure on an outer research module. Two scientists were trapped. One was attuned, the other, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, was not. Rescue teams, battling failing systems and the ongoing radiation storm, were struggling to reach them. Communications were spotty. Then a final, garbled transmission came from Dr. Tanaka, his voice strained, full of static, and something else Thuron's analytical mind struggled to categorize. "The module's air is almost gone, tell my family. The emergency seal on this side, it's compromised. My colleague, he's just sitting there. He doesn't seem to understand. I'm going to try and manually trigger the external beacon if you can lock onto it." There was a sound of tearing metal, a sharp hiss of escaping air, then silence. Later, when a rescue team finally reached the module, they found Dr. Tanaka dead, his body slumped near a manual override for the emergency beacon, which was now active. The attuned scientist was alive, unharmed, sitting calmly in his chair, his environmental suit intact. He reported in his flat, emotionless voice that the air pressure had dropped and that Dr. Tanaka had engaged in seemingly irrational physical exertion before losing consciousness. He had made no attempt to help, no attempt to understand the rapidly deteriorating situation beyond the fact that his own suit was functioning. The crisis eventually passed. The Vanguard beacon was battered but largely intact, thanks to the frantic, emotional, and often illogical-seeming heroics of the non-attuned human crew. The cost had been one life, Dr. Tanaka. In the aftermath, a profound silence fell over the station. The non-attuned humans were exhausted, grieving, but also strangely unified. They gathered, shared stories of Tanaka, offered comfort to each other. There was crying. There was anger at the universe, at the faulty equipment. There was a grim, shared determination to repair their home and honor their fallen colleague. This collective grief, this shared emotional burden, seemed to forge an even stronger bond between them. Thuron, observing this, felt the first stirrings of something profoundly alien to a Viridian: doubt, and something akin to dread. He reviewed the data from the attuned group. Their calm had not translated into efficiency. It had translated into apathy, into an inability to adapt or react to unforeseen circumstances. Their problem-solving abilities had plummeted. Their creativity was non-existent. They followed protocols, but when protocols failed or were insufficient, they simply stopped. Lena, the once laughing research assistant, had, during the worst of the crisis, been found meticulously resorting data files that had been corrupted, a task of utter triviality given the imminent threat to their lives. She had been calm. She had been focused. She had been useless. The Viridian Conclave had believed that by removing the noise of emotion, they would reveal the pure, clear signal of human intellect. Instead, they found that the noise was the signal, or at least an inseparable part of it. The passion, the fear, the grief, the joy, the illogical bonds of loyalty and love, these were not flaws. They were the very engines of human ingenuity, resilience, and survival. Dr. Tanaka's final act, a sacrifice driven by a desperate hope and concern for others, utterly illogical from a purely self-preservational standpoint, had activated the beacon that guided rescuers. The attuned scientist, perfectly logical and self-preserved, would have passively perished with him. Thuron compiled his report. It was the most difficult document he had ever created. His conclusions were stark, irrefutable, and for the Viridian Conclave, terrifying. Human emotion is not a detrimental condition to be cured, he wrote. It appears to be a fundamental component of their adaptive consciousness, critical for advanced problem-solving, motivational impetus, and societal cohesion, particularly under extreme duress. The attenuation device, while successful in dampening emotional responses, catastrophically impairs these essential functions. To uplift humanity by Viridian standards would be to cripple them, perhaps irretrievably. The Human Upliftment Initiative was immediately and silently terminated. The attuned humans on the Vanguard beacon had their EADs deactivated. The return of their emotions was a confusing, overwhelming flood for them, expertly managed by Dr. Thorne and Dr. Sharma, who now looked at Thuron not with animosity, but with a kind of weary understanding. Thuron and his Viridian team departed the Vanguard beacon soon after. The official reason given was that the research objectives had been met. The truth was far more profound. The Viridian Conclave was thrown into a state of unprecedented intellectual crisis. Their entire societal foundation, the belief in the absolute supremacy of emotionless logic, was shaken. If human emotion, in all its chaotic, unpredictable, and often terrifying intensity, was not a flaw but a strength, perhaps even a superpower, then what did that imply about their own eons of emotional suppression? Had they, in their quest for perfection, excised something vital from themselves? Humanity was no longer seen as a flawed species in need of benevolent correction. They were now viewed with a mixture of cosmic dread and profound, almost fearful respect. Their emotionality, once a subject of Viridian pity, became a source of intense, uneasy study. The primitive outbursts, the illogical sentiments, the inefficient passions, these were now seen as markers of a terrifyingly potent and unpredictable force. A new, unspoken directive spread through the Viridian Conclave. Observe humanity, study them, but do not, under any circumstances, attempt to fix them. For the Viridians had looked into the heart of what made humans human, and they had been profoundly, existentially shaken. They had sought to make humanity more like them, and in doing so, they had glimpsed a terrifying truth about the very nature of strength, and perhaps, the hidden cost of their own emotionless perfection. The universe, it seemed, had a place for chaos, for passion, for the illogical spark of the human heart. And that was a truth the Viridians would ponder in their silent, orderly worlds for a long time to come.